You can see me. Can you hear me now? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, I am live now. Sorry for the little delay, everybody. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Apologies for the delay. We'll get right into it, inshallah. So, welcome to the first session of the conference. It's officially the first session of the conference, and it will be handled by our sister, Muti'ah Badrudeen. She's going to be taking us, or she's going to be sharing knowledge and expertise on the topic fiction as a tool to bridge the gap in reality. Fiction as a tool to bridge the gap in reality. So before she comes on, I'm going to introduce her. I'm going to read out a bio, and here it goes. Muti'ah is a Nigerian reproductive health physician. She's a homeschooling mom. She's a mental health advocate. She's a writer and author who writes tales that reflect African Muslim realities. And it's usually in the form of contemporary Muslim fiction. Her international debut novel, Rekia and Z, published by Zlibris, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Zlibris US, ex Libris, was lauded as gripping, all-encompassing, and poignant on Amalia Bookshelf. And it also won the 2021 Daybreak Press Book Award for Islamic Fiction, among others. She's on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram as Dim Progress. I'm going to be putting the links to her books and her social media handles in the description of the video after the live, so look out for that. I'm going to add her to the stream now. Yes. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Now, welcome to the conference. You are our first speaker. You're the one that is opening the floor for the conference. You're the first speaker. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khairan for agreeing to do this.
I mean, thank you so much for having me.
So, the stage is yours. Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum.
Okay. Just before I start, I wanted to clarify. Is there a way to see if there's any questions or feedback from the audience? I guess I'm on my own. Mr. Hafsah? No? Okay. Right. So I'm just going to go ahead and start. Bismillah. Wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulullah. Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. ASHABI ajma'in. So as Sister Hafsah mentioned, I'm supposed to be talking on fiction as a tool for bridging reality. And I want to first start by defining what reality is. I actually prepared a couple of slides for this presentation, but this new app flawed me, so I do not know how to share it. So I'm just going to be working old school. Right, back to reality. Reality is defined as the state of things as they actually are, as opposed to the idealistic or notional idea of them that a person might have in their mind. So the way things actually exist, as opposed to the way we think they exist. That's what reality means. Or that's one of the meanings of reality. And I think that that's the one that most people have in mind when they hear things, when they hear the word reality, especially in relation to something like fiction, for example. Because a lot of people are under the they have this idea that fiction in opposition to reality, and that's what we're trying to examine in this short talk of mine, inshallah. So, the state of seeing things as they actually are, as opposed to the idealistic or notional view of a person or idea of the things. That's one definition. For the purpose of this discussion, though, I would prefer the second definition of reality, which is the state or the quality of having existence or substance. That means reality, in short, is something existing. So if you don't exist, then you're not real. Or if nobody acknowledges your existence, then you're not real. So that's what, in this sphere especially, that's the definition of reality that I'm going to be talking about. I think an example to illustrate this definition will make a lot of sense at this point. I was talking to my daughter recently, and she was expressing surprise when I said that, when we talked about the fact that there would have been a messenger from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the people of even far distant lands like China, for example. And she was like, you mean this? There would have been a Nabi to China? And I was like, yes. She says, she was skeptical about that. And then I reminded her of the ayah where Allah says that there is no nation except that He has sent to them a messenger from amongst their own people. So, of course, there would have been at some point in the past a messenger sent to every single land where there are people in existence with their own culture in their own language, because that's what Allah has told us. The fact that we do not have the records of those prophets because Allah chose not to mention them in their book, and probably their legacies were not preserved in the histories of their people, does not mean they don't exist. But in her reality, that's in the reality of my daughter, they didn't exist because she didn't know about it, so they didn't exist. And that's the concept of reality that I want us to keep in mind when we talk about fiction as a tool for bridging reality. Because what that suggests then is that reality is different from one person to the next. It's the nature by which each person sees what is in front of them, and it's almost always limited by the sum total of their own individual experiences. And in the case of fiction, what that means is that, like Walter Mosley said, if you do not exist in the fiction of a people, if your story does not exist in the fiction of a people, then you did not exist. It's that simple. If there are no stories about your existence, then you just didn't exist. And that becomes important for us as Muslims, especially in this day and age, because I as an Islamic fiction writer, get a lot of pushback sometimes from Muslims who say, why are you writing fiction? It's a waste of time. It is telling lies. It is. And to such people, I always counter with what I'm telling you now. If, like what happened to me, you grow up reading tales upon tales of people and none of them look like you, or think like you, or reason like you, or hold the same values as you, then you begin to question the validity of what you're holding there. And generations upon generations of present day Muslims especially have lived most of our lives without having experiencing ourselves in the work of fiction. Or worse, when we do show up in the literature, we show up with the negative perception that some people have assigned to us because we chose not to engage this very, very old means of communication amongst human beings, which is storytelling. So, that said, how do we then use fiction to bridge the gap in the reality of those who think that we don't exist or we shouldn't exist, and or see us in another manner, different from how we know our own selves to be, because that's our own reality. We can watch every article or every editorial or every news bulletin talk about Muslim women being oppressed and blah and blah and blah, and how, for example, the niqab is a tool of oppression and no Muslim woman wears it, voluntarily. But I would know from my own reality that that's not true. My own reality as a Muslim woman is that I am not oppressed, at least not personally, and I am wearing my niqab from choice. That is not to take away from the reality of those who are oppressed or those who are wearing it, who are being subjugated and forced to wear it. But there is also my reality, which is the reality of a woman who chooses willingly to submit to what she does for the sake of her Lord. But that narration, that reality, never gets told or is never seen. And like we have already established, if he doesn't exist, then he has no reality. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today, how we use the fiction to bridge that reality. And I'm going to be talking about it in six ways, where, there are so many ways that you could probably do it, but I thought that mention it in 6 ways would be easier to remember. So I divided them into 3 R's and 3 P's, or 3 P's and 3 R's, for how to use fiction, especially as a writer, to bridge the reality. Now, for people who are not writers, but if you read a lot of fiction, you'll also be able to see what's going on in a writer's work if you pay attention to these tools. Now, why I say that is because, again, people always mistake fiction for just something frivolous or for just some time wasting or something that doesn't mean anything. But that's not true. More than probably anything else in the world, the stories that is being told from generation to generation shapes what society views and accepts as the norm. The stories that get told shape how we view reality, and that's the power of fiction. So whether you're a reader or you're a writer, having an idea of how we use this tool of fiction to bridge reality or to shape reality, so to speak, is indispensable. So in 3 P's, which I call passion and specific points and the packaging, as well as in 3 R's, which I call research, relatability, and readers. And I'm going to go over that again, inshallah. The 3 P's are passion, the specific points, and the packaging. And the 3 R's are the research, the relatability, and the readers. Now, passion. What drives a person to write? It's not... Sometimes I get people say, you just sit down and it just comes. Yeah, sometimes. But most times it's a lot harder than that. Writing is a labor, as most things, of love. You have to have a driving force behind you. And even when the force is in secular terms just to make money, for people who just do it as a job, it almost always isn't just a job. Almost every writer has a driving force. They have something, a message, something that they want to leave behind. Now, for some people, it might just be as self-serving as, I want to leave my name, or I want to be known as the best writer there is, or I want to make a lot of money. But more often than not, it's more of the things that they are passionate about. And sometimes writers leave that in, they talk about it in interviews or introductions of their books, or articles that they write, and it's easy then for you to see what they're talking or what they're passionate about, what is driving them, and so writers become known for those things. And as a person who writes, you can almost define for yourself after a while why you are writing. For writers who might not have been so explicit, or even if within yourself you have been unable to figure it out, an easy way to decipher from the books of or works of that writer is what are the defining threads or the recurring themes that we find in this person's work. What are the defining thread or the recurring themes that we find in this person's work? And every story, every writer has a, you just need to look for it. They have things that they are talking about. They have things that they are passionate about. They have things that always shows up in their work, because writing, like I mentioned earlier, especially for fiction, is usually not just writing. There's a story. Like someone said, everybody has an agenda. There's something they're selling. If I'm going to use myself as an example, my work almost always centers, Nigerian Muslim women, or specifically Nigerian Yoruba Muslim women. And there's almost always a niqabi in my story. They're big on female friendships, and positive Muslim marriages are usually like a small thread of it. And women's, self-defining autonomy are things that I talk about. Obviously, the central theme of my work is Islam, because I write Islamic fiction, and I'm always careful about making sure that I don't do anything that will be, I don't write anything that might be construed as, leading people away from Islam. But those other threads, irrespective of what story I am telling, those other threads that come there are the defining thread and the recurring things that show up in my work. And that's because my personal driving force for storytelling or for writing fiction is to write meaningful tales of Muslims who are living their lives according to the Quran and the Sunnah, in the best manner possible. They're just living so that people can see that, like I mentioned earlier, that reality also exists, that there are still Muslims who are still living the deen and are thriving with that. So that's my driving force, and that brings all of those things inside. So, number one, a way of bridging that reality is to have a passion, or to recognize your passion, or if you're the reader, to recognize the passion behind the person's work. Number two is then the specific points. Now, all of the things that you're passionate about and you want to talk about may not always show up in all of the work that you do. Sometimes they are too short, sometimes they don't fit in, sometimes you can't find a way to make it work. So you have to figure out for each particular piece of work that you're doing, what's the specific point that you want to talk about. So for my last book, Reiki and Z, I knew very early on that I wanted to touch on sexual assault, and I also knew that I wanted to touch on mental health. Those two things are things that, yes, I am passionate about, but I don't always talk about them in every single piece of work that I write. And so while I still have, a character in the club, and I still have female friendships, I'm big on female friendships, and I still have, marriage and all of the other things, for this particular book, I wanted to talk about that point too, those two specific points. And I wanted to make it I wanted to show or display the reality of how it affects women, or specifically Muslim women, and how sometimes that is manifested. And so the point the points that you want to talk about to bridge that reality, to focus on in that particular piece of work, you're going to have to figure out how it relates to this story and to your main purpose, to your passion, and then weave it into your work. Which brings me to the third P, which is packaging. How do you use those points? How do you pass that passion? How do you bridge that reality without seeming like you are preaching to the people? And I think that for this, the easiest answer is the age-old writing wisdom, which is show, don't tell. So if I wanted to, like when I wanted to talk about mental health in my last book, for example, I needed to figure out how to make it work with a character that was having, her own mental health issues, and then we see how she evolves from then on. Or the same thing with sexual assault, and especially the generational nature of sexual assault. How sometimes that influences the decisions that people make, and we don't even know, the reason behind those decisions. All we see, obviously, are the things at face value. So, how you package those points without seeming to lob it over your reader's head. Which is why if you read some really good writers, you wouldn't even notice, that they are making a point while you are reading the book. It's so seamless. It's packaged so seamlessly, and it makes you think afterwards, and you wonder, a lot more than if the person were to actually tell you, you should do this or you shouldn't do that, but rather because they have embedded it in the story. And that's why I was saying earlier that fiction is one of the most powerful tools for shaping how society, or shaping what society accepts as acceptable, so to speak. A good example would be, I remember when I read Umzekia's Hearts We Lost. I actually have a copy of it right here beside me. And the protagonist wanted to marry the sister of the lady that everybody had thought he was going to marry, except that the sister was 14 years old. And so there was a lot of issues around that. And I remember finishing that book and thinking, my daughter would have been around, I don't know, 6, 8 at that time. And I remember thinking, subhanallah, if somebody came to me and when my child is 14 and says they want to marry, I don't care how long I've known the person, it's going to be hard. So it made me think, and that's my point. She was making a point from the perspective of the reality that we were seeing. This was an upright man whom the family had known since he was a child, was well respected, well trusted. There was no, indication or no reason why the family shouldn't be receptive towards the idea of him marrying their daughter. Except for this was in America, by the way, except for the societal values or societal norms around what is considered pedophilia. And so she kind of wove that story around that, and that makes you think about the absolutes, and sometimes how the ideas we hold in theory might not necessarily sit well with us when it comes into practice. Anyway, my point is, and I've digressed a bit, is that the way the message you want to pass and the driving force behind your writing has been embedded into your work, especially for us writers and readers of Islamic fiction, is very important in making people see and accept this reality of being able to live, as Muslims in submission to our Lord, without it seeming as though you are being preachy, which is one of the things that people would want to accuse you of. So you're going to have to, we have to learn to use these tools properly. Now, for the 3R, probably the most important is research. Now, a lot of people have the idea that to write, because we're writing fiction, it really is just sitting down and making up the stories in your head. And yes, it is for a large part of it. It is just sitting down writing the stories in your head. But then to make the story, the way I say this, when I teach my children, the way I say is that the number one rule of fiction is that it must be believable. It doesn't matter if it is sci-fi, science fiction, or even fantasy, or horror, or whatever the story you're writing. It must be plausible, at least enough for me to suspend my disbelief. Now, research is how you achieve that. So if I wanted to write what it was like in 1950s Nigeria, for example, then I'm going to have to look into what it was like in 1950s Nigeria. I have to check the archives, go on the internet, maybe talk to some people that were there in those days. Ask, you need to get into the nitty-gritties of those details. Not because you want to write a textbook on that, but because weaving those details into your story is then how you bridge that reality, such that people who read the book feel like they're in 1950s Nigeria. The problem, of course, with research is it can get too much and it can also be too little. So we have to find a balance. I always err on the side of too much. So you have the information that you need and then write. So you do the research on the side of too much research, but then write the details on the side of not too much or maybe a little too little. So you don't bore people with the research, but you have enough to make your work stand out, or to make your word believable in terms of what it was like, or what you're trying to portray, the reality of what you're trying to portray. The next R then is relatability. That sounds almost close to research, except that it's not exactly research, because you can do all of the research and then you still don't sound like what you were aiming for. The easiest way to explain relatability is the question, would your character recognize herself? So if you're writing a book about a Nkobi blah 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 woman, if a Nkobi blah blah woman picks that book and reads it, will she recognize herself inside it? And that's the problem with a lot of mainstream fiction written by and about Muslims these days, is that we pick up the book, we the Muslims pick up those books that are sold as Muslim tales, and then we read them and we like, what on earth? That has nothing to do with us. Or worse, the portrayal of Muslims on big screen, either on TV or on movies, and people watch it and like, are you serious? You didn't find one Muslim to talk to see that doesn't look anything like us, or doesn't do this is not how we do it, or this is not how. So you might have done the research, but the relatability is how that all of that research translates to everybody's daily life. And what I do, or how I do that, is I talk to the people who most closely align to the character I'm trying to portray. That's one of the things I do. So if I'm talking about, a young girl, say for example 18, and who is in school and having some blah blah blah, I'm going to try and find a young girl who is 18 and in that setting and ask her pointed questions. So if something like this were to happen, and would this be your reaction? Or if I was writing a man, for example, when I was writing one of the characters that people loved in my Ricky and Z was the character of Zainuna's husband. And when I was writing Zainuna's husband, I got in touch with a number of Muslim men, and I was like, putting questions to them. What do you think about this? What if your wife said this? And what if your wife did that? Obviously, everybody's going to have different reactions based on their own experiences and their own temperament. That's not the point. Is not to get everybody's reaction. The point is to make sure that whatever reaction you do get doesn't come off as unrelatable, because then the reality that you're trying to portray in your fiction, which is you again bridging that gap, is missing. Now, the last R is your readers. And I know that the end game of writing is the readers, and so it seemed like, oh, the readers don't get to see it until you're done with the book, but that's not true. We have beta readers, and beta readers are helpful because sometimes as an author we think that what you have written is clear. It will be like, in the attempt to show not tell, we think that we have passed the message. The beta reader can help you say, what are you talking about here? I didn't quite understand. Or they might point out, the blind spots, the things that you have gotten too close to the manuscript to see. And so you don't realize that, okay, there's something missing here. They can point it out, or this one is too much, or this one is too little, or this person is not relatable. I typically advise that we use different beta readers for different, portions of your work, especially the specific parts of it that you want to make relatable. Find somebody who's been there, or preferably the person who you talk to the first time. Let them read through the work and see how much they, if it made sense to them, and if they can see themselves in the book, if it portrays the reality that you're trying to give. And the other thing that readers do for your work as a writer when you're trying to portray reality is they tell you when you're on the right path. So yes, they see all the things that are wrong sometimes, but more often than not, they tend to be kinder to us writers than we are to ourselves. We are usually our own worst, critics. So having a reader can be like, okay, you're on the right path, and then where to adjust and how to go on. And so that's totally imperative in making sure that you're getting what you want to get out, from into your book, into the world. And so, to recap, fiction is not just fiction, like people like to dismiss. It is a way of reflecting reality as it exists to people who may or may not know about it. Ultimately, if you're not in the fiction of your people, then you do not exist. As Muslim writers, what we are trying to do, or what we should be trying to do, is to bridge that reality so that Muslims can see themselves in the books, but also so that those who are not of us can at least be exposed to our reality. As a reader or as a writer, we look out for the driving force or the passion behind the work, the points that are being passed on by the work. Once you pay attention to it, you begin to notice that, as well as how the points are being packaged. The research that goes into the work, how relatable it is, and the effects on the reader. So I'm going to stop here, and since I'm talking to myself, I have no idea if anybody has any questions or contributions or whatever. I'm just going to let Sister Hafsah take over, inshallah.
Now, Jazakumullah khairan. I switched off the comments so that it will not, distract those that are watching. Although in the comments there aren't any questions yet. There aren't any questions yet, but there have been. I'm going to highlight some of the comments now so that you can see them. Can you see? Yes. Can you see that one?
No, I can only see your comments. I think probably
I've
because I don't know
highlighted
where.
one on the screen.
Probably because I don't know where to see anything. I can only see the chat
It's on
between
the
you and
screen.
I.
No, it's on the
No, I can't see
screen.
anything on the screen apart from you and I.
Wow, it's actually on the screen
Hmm.
now. Okay, let me read it out. It's from Rahima Odushote, and she said it. She has had thoughts too. She said, let me read it verbatim. She said, I've
Okay.
had such thoughts too until I realized that fiction is a means of relating realities, and we have so many stories in the Quran. I think it was in the beginning of your talk when you were talking about people, saying that fiction is unnecessary. It's telling lies and all that. I think she was she was responding to that. Okay, this is another one from Afnan Dridi, and she said, I completely agree that writers write according to their beliefs and views of reality, often consciously. Yes, I agree totally with your submission about that too, because most of us, I won't, let me say most 95% of writers draw experiences from things that write from their experiences with things that happen around them, things that happen in the world and all that. Most writers write to, change something, to show something that, they are passionate about, and they want to use their writing to change it. I, at least I believe so. I believe that's what most writers do.
This is definitely usually like we have something to say about the way we see the world. It
Mm-hmm.
might be how we want the world to be, or it might just be, how we have perceived the world and we are just mirroring back to the world. But yes, nobody writes in a vacuum, even
Mm.
when it seems like it is totally um, disconnected from reality.
Reality
It usually isn't. It's just another way of reflecting reality from the writer's point of view.
perspective, yes,
Yeah.
exactly. This is another one from Hima Odushote, and she said, there was the second story in Surah Al-Kahf about two owners of the gardens, which is a parable as stated in the verses. I think it was when you were talking about that there are a lot of stories abound in the Quran. I think that was what she was talking about as well. There's another one. It makes sense. The words of Allah are always the truth. The words of Allah are always the truth. Um, this is another one. Wow. We have we have more comments now. It beats me why you can't see the comments on the screen.
Yeah,
I can't
I
even
can't see any of the
explain
comments. I
why.
can only
Oh my
see
God.
you and my own comments with you. That's all.
Oh, okay. You know what? Change it to public. Just click on public.
Where
Where is
do
the
I click on
public
public?
host chat? Can you see public and host chat?
I can't see. I can only see host here. I don't know where to change anything here. It's
It's fine. It's fine. I'll read it out. Don't worry. It's from the case MORENIKE MAFE, and she said, even though my imagination isn't vivid enough to deep dive into fictional writing, I do appreciate the creativity that goes into the work by authors. I admire them a great deal and applaud them.
Jazakillah khairan, Sister Bill Murphy.
This is another one. I don't know who put this here. Let me see. She says, I can't see comments. I can't see the name of the Facebook comments, the Facebook commenters. I can't see your name. So this person says that writing fiction really helps me a lot to transform my emotions into something more metaphoric where we still can deliver the lessons or messages to the readers.
Yeah,
True,
true.
it is how we wrap it up, the package with the gift inside it. Exactly. She's referring to your packaging, the way we
Yeah.
package our message, the way we package the lesson that we want the audience to get from our work. Is another
It's
message.
interesting what she said about the packaging. I just thought
Yes.
about it now. My daughter has been reading a lot more adult books now. She's almost 15,
Okay.
and I made her read Leila Abu Laila's Minaret recently, and of course she finished it and she came back and she was like, I don't like how it ended, and I was like, okay, let's talk about how you would rather it ended. And so, not to give spoilers or spoiler
Okay.
alerts, there was a much older woman who seemed to like be engaged, involved with a much younger man. So I was asking her, would you have wanted her to end up with that man? She was like, no. I mean, that would be stupid. He's so
Ah,
young, you know? And I thought, oh, wow. Normally, you would think that a 15-year-old would be all over, the idea of being in love. But the way the book had built up, it was it was easy for her to see the pitfall of that kind of relationship, even though normally at her age you would think that she would still be in the face of love conquers all, or love is what is
yes, in
most
the
important, or
bubble.
whatever, but she, by the time she'd read through, and so that's the point of the packaging I wanted to talk about, the way the author wrote it, like it was easy for you to see that that relationship would have been doomed anyway, even if she had stayed with him. So yeah, the messaging in our packaging is definitely, and it's a
Okay.
beautiful thing to read, especially when you're reading with a writer's mind. You see how people craft their work, and you're like, okay,
Exactly. Yes.
I appreciate
Exactly.
this. Like, subhanallah.
Exactly. So I'm going to read another comment. I think that first comment was from Sister ASQARINI. I checked Facebook now, and this one is from Sister Mariam Abiodun Omolade, and she says that concerning people saying fiction is a waste of time, I had to ask my ustaz too, and he said it is permissible and also encouraged me to continue writing.
Mm.
I
She's
think
very
that's
fortunate. I stopped writing fiction. In fact, I stopped reading fiction for about 10
wow.
years. After I released my first book, Faltering Steps, and then there were a couple of people who I really respect, but with all of the idea of how fiction is a waste of time and it's lying, and you have all of this great gift, mashallah, why would you waste it writing fiction? And so I stopped reading and writing fiction, and I wrote my non-fiction, Abdullah. And I didn't read any fiction for over a decade. I think it was closer to 15 years, until my children started exploring, books. And then that's when I started going back. Before I realized, like, how Ustaz said, this is something that we need,
Hmm.
in terms of the people who are going to read books are going to read books. People who are going to read fiction are going to read fiction. And if they don't have the fiction that passes our values across, they're just going to read whatever
They're
they
going to,
find.
yes, they're going to
They're
read the
just going to
ones
read,
from
whatever they find.
other
That's
side. Yeah.
that's where I started from, that idea of, okay, let's bring out books that Muslims read. These days I'm more on the side of, well, I mean, we've been reading a lot of non-Muslims for so long. It's
Hmm.
time they read our reality.
Realities,
So we're
exactly.
writing our own reality now for them to read as well. So we're not just writing for us as well, but we're writing for them to see our own
See
reality
us.
as well. Because, like I mentioned, if they don't see it, we just don't exist. As far as they're concerned, we just don't exist.
And they
And so
keep
that's the work that we are doing now.
exactly, and they keep putting out, because if you see the Muslims that are being portrayed in the mainstream media, they're nothing to write
Yes.
home about, because
Subhanallah.
you look at some
Subhanallah.
Muslim
It's
characters and
the
you go like,
same,
is this
it's the
how
same stories being recycled over and
exactly
over,
and
and you'll be
over
like,
again?
God, like,
So
stop. I don't even want
frustrating.
to see it.
It's frustrating, subhanallah. So
Yeah, we'll keep trying. May Allah make it easy, inshallah.
I mean, inshallah. I'm going to there's a question here from Mr. Rahima Odushote, and she says, this is a personal question. At what age did you start writing fiction?
Oh, wow. I don't know, I would have been 14, 15, I think. I was in boarding school in secondary school. So, and we didn't have what was there to do in boarding school. My school was very strict, so people didn't come in except for once in a month for visiting day. We didn't have day students. Everybody was in boarding school. So whatever books that we all brought, we'll finish in a couple of weeks. And so I started writing stories in notebooks and, have people read it, and it was fun. And of course, most of them, when I think back at it now, most of them were just silly, high school, high school, high school stories that
Stories,
read
yes.
a lot like Sweet Valley High and Sweet
Ah,
Valley Twin and Sweet, because those are the things that we read in
right,
those days. And that's
exactly,
the thing.
yes.
That's what because that's what we see in books. And for a long time, it never occurred to me that we could write our own tales.
Mm.
In fact, until I was introduced to the work of Leila Abul Ayla, and I was in my 30s then,
Subhanallah.
for the first time, and I read her book, and I was like, whoa, wow. She's writing actual Muslim women, and non-Muslims are reading it. Okay, we are going to do this. So, yeah, it was a long time ago. But like I said, I stopped for about 10, 15 years. I didn't read and write for some time. So, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alamin. Alhamdulillah that you continued and Allah inspired you to write,
Alhamdulillah.
to continue writing and share with us your amazing, amazing gifts. Barakallahu
Alhamdulillah.
feek.
Jazakillah khair.
I'm going to put, I think it's almost an hour now, so I'll just put up one last comment. There are other comments, but I'm going to put up just this last comment. And it's from, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Janala Mamdu. And she says, my writing is fiction. Inshallah, the topics relate to real challenges, failures, and victories experienced in real life, and inshallah can help someone somewhere.
Inshallah. Inshallah.
That's it.
I think that on that note, I should just mention that something that I think a lot of Muslim writers grapple with is this idea that we either have to write Islamic fiction or we don't write at all, so that people will not say we are lying or we are. And I think I struggled with that too at first, but it's also important, I think, that we explore the full range of our creativity. We don't all of us have to write Islamic fiction. If your writing is wholesome and you're not calling people to something that is haram, I think that we should write in as many genres as we are comfortable with. As long as you're not promoting anything that is haram and you're not calling people to something that on the day of Yom Al-Qiyamah, you will have to face Allah and justify yourself and answer for those people's sins. Otherwise, write romantic comedy if you want, write science fiction, write speculative fiction, write historical fiction. I actually do want to do historical fiction myself. I love that genre. Write non-fiction, write anything as long as you're not calling to haram. Inshallah, may Allah make it easy for all of us.
Ameen, ameen, ameen. Now, I think time is fast spent. It's almost 2 minutes to 5:30. 1 hour. We've spent 1 hour. Let me not mention it because time differences. So, Jazakillah. I'm overwhelmed, but Jazakillah khairan for doing this, for sharing this message to all of us. I will just ask you to give us one piece of advice, just one parting piece of advice, and then we can call it a day.
I always hate that when they say one piece of advice, because then you start thinking which one should I pick and which one is more important. I think that for today I'm going to say that my advice is what I've just said. Write whatever you want to write, as long as you're not calling anybody to haram. Explore the limits of your creativity and then push even beyond that. If you want to write, just put pen to paper or put your finger pads to the keyboard and just write.
Now, just write. Now, Jazakillah khairan. Once again, Jazakillah khairan. May Allah reward you abundantly. If you have any more questions, please leave them in the comments and we will get.
How can I access the comments? Because I don't actually know where this comments would be. On your Facebook group, or where is it? Where are they?
They're on YouTube and on the Facebook group. Yes.
Okay, so
Yes.
just DM me the link to the Facebook group, please. So if there's anything, any comments or whatever, I can pop in, and any questions or whatever, I can pop in and answer them, inshallah.
Okay, inshallah, inshallah, inshallah. So thank you all for watching. Thank you all for joining us. We'll be coming on with the next speaker in an hour's time. Inshallah. So please expect the links in the Telegram group and in your email, and also, refresh the group. If you are watching on Facebook, refresh the group so that you can see the stream when it starts. Now, see you in an hour. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.